A tray clattered against the tile, and for just a second, every voice in the crowded base cafeteria seemed to hush. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of uniforms and whispered accolades, hit like and subscribe, especially if you know an unsung hero whose story deserves to be heard. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like this can happen anywhere, at any table, on any base. It might even be happening behind you right now. No one would have noticed the woman at the back of the queue if she hadn't been humming, softly, something old and half-forgotten, a tune that made the corporal in front turn and smile before blending into the thrum of lunch-hour bustle. There wasn't anything that marked her out. Civilian jacket, jeans, a scuffed ID badge half-tucked in her shirt. At 28, she didn't carry herself with the swagger of those who savored rank. The only giveaway, a faint, silvery scar peeking behind one ear, and a gaze that lingered a heartbeat too long on the pilot's wings pinned to chest all around her. The officers at the front, Colonel Rains at their core, quick wit on display as always, were sparring over old call signs. Banter flicked back and forth, stories of how Brick got his moniker after surviving a crash that should have left him a ghost, how Blizzard earned hers on a Kabul airstrip wide awake in a whiteout. Call signs are given, not chosen. The old wisdom went, and Rains, grinning, made a show of scanning the room for fresh meat. That's when his eyes landed on her. Just a flicker of mischief. Then, loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear, he shot his shot. All right, let's settle this. Ma'am, what's your call sign? It was theater, the kind that draws in every idle lunchgoer and kitchen hand. Someone nearby failed to stifle a laugh. Surely she didn't have one. She looked so young, out of place among the pressed uniforms and their history. But the woman paused. She looked up, not flustered, not flattered, just considering. Forks hovered midair. The register beeped unanswered. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then she met his gaze and said, almost gently, almost as an afterthought, Iron Wraith, sir. The laughter around them stuttered, some echoing the colonnade of doubt on Rain's face. Iron Wraith, someone echoed. Thought that was just a story. Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more a memory flickering at the edge of her lips. Across the room, a young airman's sandwich froze halfway to his mouth as recognition dawned, faint and weary. It would be wrong to say the room went silent. Rather, it felt as if the ceiling had lowered imperceptibly, every year trained in her direction, the conversation's temperature dropping by several degrees. The lineup shuffled, uneasy. Across the expanse of plastic trays and stainless steel, Colonel Rains blinked. He wasn't laughing anymore. He remembered a report, years back, a mission gone sideways where someone with the call sign Iron Wraith pulled surviving crew from a burning cockpit. It was legend, the stuff swapped in bars and scribbled into flight logs by those who'd never met her. Always tagged with, but surely she was older, a veteran from another war. They'd all assumed, because legends usually came with gray hair and a 1,000-yard stare. Now, with half the base cafeteria watching, the colonel's stance straightened out of memory more than respect. He'd only ever heard her referenced in stories that didn't quite square with her age. No one had really known her, not truly. Only that she was there, and then she was gone, like a wraith on the wind. Earnings ribbons that never made the base newsletter. She took her tray and, as if the moment had never happened, made her way to the most worn table in the room, the one under the faded squadron flag, where only ghosts and the genuinely weary ever sat. A couple of lieutenants fumbled, looking after her, unsure if they should follow or let the myth keep its distance. Maybe it would have ended there. But in that instant, her quiet affirmation and the colonel's uncharacteristic pause, the old rule of cliques and rank broke. In the space between questions and answers, their world shuffled, just a little. The legend of Iron Wraith was real, breathing, and barely older than most of the rookies waiting to be called up. If you've ever wondered what stories haunt the handwritten tags on shadow boxes ignored in dusty corners, or felt the weight of names whispered with awe in noisy halls, remember Iron Wraith. Sometimes the hero is young, the scars invisible to anyone who doesn't know what to look for, and the only sign of greatness is a moment where the whole room remembers how little they know about the strangers at their table. The hum in the cafeteria never quite returned to its earlier pitch, no matter how many trays slid along rails or how many requisition jokes fizzled at the serving line. It was as if a collective memory had glitched, something everyone recognized, but no one could quite admit out loud. All eyes discreetly, sometimes not so discreetly, tracked the woman now infamous as Iron Wraith, though she seemed determined to let the ground swallow her up. Still, her presence forced a reckoning. Lieutenants, technicians, even civilian contractors who'd wandered in for coffee watched and weighed what they thought they knew against what now unraveled before them. For most, her legend was foggy at best. A footnote at a briefing, a rumor swapped over late evening beers, attached to a string of nearly impossible stories. Solo extractions, medevacs under fire, a mountainous valley landing in darkness only a reckless or desperate pilot would attempt. Some said she'd earned her stripes in hostile airspace before she even collected her full year of seniority. Others recounted that she'd once been listed as Kia, her survival a bureaucratic mystery that never found its way into newsletters or ceremony programs. The reality unfolding at that cafeteria table was much stranger. She was not just alive, but shockingly young, vivid, and more present than any of the worn tales could render her. Colonel Rains, visibly shaken out of his former bravado, haunted the edge of her table with a kind of humble curiosity. It dawned on him, and perhaps on others too, that their casual camaraderie had nearly trampled over the quiet dignity of someone who'd done far more than they could imagine. He hesitated, then sat, the stiff movement of command melting away into something closer to genuine respect. With a careful, sidelong glance, he started, "They never tell us the real story about these missions, do they?" For the first time, the woman looked at him directly, her gaze steady but offering little. "No, sir, they don't," she replied, her tone stripped of any pretense. "Mostly because it's not usually just one story. Sometimes it's 100, some never told, some no one's left to tell." She pushed a fry across her plate, not eating, voice almost lost in the shuffle around them. A few more gathered, nursing the pretense of fresh coffee while straining for her words. One by one, names and past call signs from the room lined up mentally alongside her, searching for scraps of shared history. The junior pilot from earlier, jittery but emboldened by the moment, asked directly, "Were you really the one from Jawara?" Heads turned, the cafeteria's volume telescoping in an instant. "Jawara was a bad day," she answered, voice flat, eyes tracing something far away. "But there were others, and we all did what we could. Nothing works if you fly solo. Someone's always got your back, whether you spot them or not." The colonel nodded, quietly processing the implications, the veracity of her legend, the humility of her reply, and the scars she wasn't showing. Brief flashes, a snatch of a tattoo above her wrist, the telltale tilt of her head that pilots recognized as muscle memory, painted her more vivid than the stitched names on anyone's chest. She remained at the epicenter of a new myth, one where heroism was neither visible nor brash, but etched in habit, refusal, and silent persistence. Stories began circulating with new conviction, the entire cafeteria recontextualizing small kindnesses, remembering rumors of leaves skipped, flights volunteered for, dangers misguidedly chalked up to luck. The senior supply techs, who'd once dismissed her as an overpaid contractor, exchanged meaningful glances and quietly gathered their gear. Enlisted aircrew, who previously wouldn't have noticed a civilian younger than most lieutenants, found themselves roped into a reverent silence. Someone from the maintenance bay, remembering a night shift when she'd helped patch hydraulic lines without fanfare, now understood who had been sweating beside him in the freezing hangar. The colonel cleared his throat, not sure where to land next. Sometimes, it's the ones who never expect an introduction who write the best chapters, he offered finally. There was something raw in his tone, a reluctant recognition of how little command really knows its own. She didn't argue. She just nodded, softer now, as someone across the table placed their hand over a faded squadron patch, wordlessly saluting without ceremony or audience. The room gradually drifted back into motion, the 1,000 tiny negotiations of cafeteria life resuming. But there was an unmistakable difference. It was as though the air itself remembered the weight of humility, of presuming nothing about the quietest among you. The story of Iron Wraith, real and alive, hovered everywhere, subtly inscribed on the faces of those who left their meals half-eaten, uncertain if they'd just witnessed the closing of an old legend were the opening lines of a new one. No one dared ask for a photo or even an autograph, the kind of fanfare reserved for outsiders, not family. Instead, respect was paid quietly, with lived-in silences and upturned glances, the only proof necessary that sometimes, among hundreds of strangers, you might eat your lunch beside a myth who's still deciding just how much of her story the world deserves to know. As the sun dipped low, casting golden stripes across the cafeteria's battered tables, the rhythm of the room slowly reclaimed its everyday pulse, but nothing was quite the same. The legend of WRAITH had landed among them like a stone thrown in still water, and the ripples continued long after most had emptied their trays and returned to the call of duty. For those who'd caught pieces of the quiet exchange or glimpsed the barely perceptible interaction between the colonel and the young woman, the world outside the double-glass doors felt different, sharper, somehow more layered, as if everyone now shared in a secret heavy with significance. She lingered a while after the crowd had thinned, picking at the last of her cold fries. The awkwardness had faded, replaced by a respectful hush from those drifting through the corridors nearby. One or two pausing in the doorway for a final look, uncertain if they should intrude or simply hold the memory. Conversations shifted in hushed tones around the base, bits of her story stitched into new legends, tales recounted with renewed awe in late-night duty rooms, names checked against rosters by half-curious airmen. Yet, WRAITH herself seemed untouched by all this, part ghost, part flesh and blood, always looking past the moment, as if measuring the room for exits known only to her. Colonel Rains reappeared, his demeanor stripped of banter, now bearing the humility of a man who has glimpsed his own ignorance and chosen to step forward anyway. He stood a respectful distance, clearing his throat. "You know, that old flag's seen a lot. Not sure it's ever seen someone make us rethink everything we thought we knew." His voice carried no trace of ceremony. It was gratitude, pure and simple. She met his gaze, for the first time truly present, and in that small square of cafeteria, a lifetime's worth of honors hung unsaid between them. "We all have stories, sir," she said softly. "Most just never get told. I was there when it mattered. But there's always someone else who pays the price." It wasn't humility for show, and those words weighed more than any ribbon. The colonel nodded, less a gesture of agreement than of understanding, a silent acknowledgement that true valor is often hidden where no one thinks to look. A pair of maintenance crew walked over, risking the breach of quiet with a hesitant, "You ever need anything, you know where to find us." She smiled, a thin line of gratitude and exhaustion, and they returned to their work with a new story to share. Around the corner, a young airwoman who'd just started her first tour paused, catching sight of WRAITH's silhouette against the flag, imprinting that image in her mind as something to carry through lonely shifts and long deployments. The legend would grow in the telling, inevitably changed, but the essentials would remain: a young woman, marked by feats and secrets, quietly acknowledging a respect earned the hard way. As twilight stretched long, the narrator reflects, sometimes the most extraordinary stories remain invisible, hidden in plain sight until someone asks just the right question at the right time. Sometimes, the weight of service isn't measured in stripes or medals, but in the silences that follow when truth is spoken. Those few hours under fluorescent lights would ripple for years across the base, carried by those in the know, quietly reshaping the contours of what everyone thought possible. By the time she rose and left, her table was as empty as it had begun, save for the lingering afterimage of a legend. She walked past faces now changed by recognition, the quick nods, the reverent hush, her presence rewiring old assumptions, old prejudices, old tales. To them, she became not only a name but a living reminder that greatness is often quiet, and that the heroes among us rarely seek the spotlight. Outside, the evening breeze stirred the old flag and dusk swept through the windows, leaving behind only stories to be retold and a sense, sudden and overwhelming, that each person harbored their own hidden chapters. And somewhere in the gathering dark, as the last tray clattered into place, a new myth found fertile ground, waiting to be discovered by anyone brave enough to ask who sits beside them, unseen.